All right. Ron, who do you have missing today, if anybody?
I think we have everybody here today.
Oh.
And the only time constraint we have is Mr. Gatewood has what, 5:30? 5:30.
Okay.
Yes. Looks like we have everybody, well, except for Lois, right? Or at least.
Harley?
Yes, the only person we are missing is Lois, and I don't think she'll mind if I share this. She has a new grandbaby, so that's why she's missing.
He arrived today, so.
If Lois is live streaming us tonight, which I'm sure she is,
Oh, I'm
that
sure.
we would like to send her a congratulatory note on behalf of all of us here in the SPALC bargaining session. So congratulations, Grandma.
All right, any time constraints on your team, Harley? Anybody
I'm starting to get
on the spell team have time constraints? Okay, good. All right, with that, we have minutes from last week. Remember what we said last week, the minutes are done as we go. And then Amy shares them with everybody. So anybody have any changes, corrections, or deletions to the minutes? They're on the shared drive, and you can get them the next day or at the very most
I get them.
at night when you get home if you feel like reading it. All right, any corrections to any of those? All right, can we accept the minutes then from our last meeting, March 31st? May I see thumbs, please? Thank you. Okay, last time we met, we did talk about Article 5, and it's my understanding we have some things for Article 5 that we may be able to okay tonight or this afternoon.
We do. So we have been working on the field trip assignment process to be added to the collective bargaining agreement, and we decided to use our Transportation Labor Management Committee to present the document, get some feedback, and come to some consensus, which we do have here tonight. So if Amy French would be kind enough to call that up, we can go ahead and have some conversations about that. And just so we can kind of go through that before we, one final time before we go ahead and put it up to vote. Are you guys okay if I just read through this? You good?
Okay, yep.
All right. So step one is this is the step-by-step procedure to assign field trips. So the step one process to be performed in the employee lounge on Mondays for audiences to observe. At that time, no questions are to be asked to ensure proficiency of the task. Any questions should be provided to the representative and or the supervisor prior to the assignments. This would be the trip personnel and management. This is a result of our visits to some of the compounds and really just having kind of a transparent process so that people can check and make sure that, everything is done properly and people who deserve field trips would be assigned them. Step two then, trip personnel and management are to provide updates. The assigned SPALC designee along with the changes from the week prior to assignment to ensure all parties are on the same page. And again, this is the responsibility of the trip personnel management and the SPALC rep at that compound. Step number three, trips are assigned according to availability and seniority in Bush Hive to post for employees to pick up no later than Friday at 10:30 a.m. of that week. After the trip list is posted in the lounge and available for employees to view and perform. Any trip not picked up will be reassigned and treated as a decline in rotation. Again, this is all the responsibility of all trip personnel. Step four, any trip that is not declined within the first 24-hour time period will be considered as a decline and will be skipped in the next rotation. Once the employee has declined 3 trips by contract, they are to be removed from the trip list and the documentation to be sent to the employee for notification purposes. Step 5, address any issues and/or problems that were brought to the attention of management or SPALC representative to provide resolution to the employees regarding concerns with the trip process and/or assignment. And finally, step 6 is trip cancellation at the day of. If there's a trip cancellation, the employee will be compensated for 2 hours for the inconvenience and will receive a replacement trip. If the trip is canceled prior to the day of, employee will be notified and replacement will be provided within that rotation.
Okay. Any questions? Harley?
We have an add-on, Ron.
Pardon me?
There was something that we missed.
Okay.
We have an add-on, it's supposed to be a number 7. I'm gonna hand the mic to Jared.
Yes, sir. Okay, yeah, there's a number 7 being added after we discussed it earlier. I'm sorry, I forgot to share that to you.
Okay.
But number 7 will be that any employee that is absent the day prior to their assigned field trip will be considered declined unless an appropriate doctor's note is provided. And I'll share that to you now. Yes.
Well, Jared, on that one, you're gonna run the risk or management asking for a doctor's note, and our contract says 3 consecutive days. So we can't put it that way because that language will be going against what the contract says. So what should happen is only have trip supposed to be taken from an employee if they call off sick the day before the field trip. If they do not call off sick the day before the field trip, that employee is supposed to be able to keep their field trip. For example, it could be Monday morning, I just received a notice, well, it could be Friday evening, I just received a notice from my doctor's office saying that I need to, I have a doctor's appointment on Monday. I go to work Monday morning, but Monday afternoon, I'll be off because I'm going to the doctor and I might have a field trip on Tuesday. So we need to let it reflect that, because if we don't, it's gonna be an issue, because it's an issue now. Some people are just taking off because they have doctor's appointments, they're maybe caregivers to someone or whatever, and their field trips are being taken because they are not at work the day before. So our agreement was, if they call off sick the day before, because if they call off sick, you don't know if they're gonna be there the next day, then the trip is being taken. But if they have a doctor's appointment or just any kind of appointment, that's not saying they're not gonna come to work the next day. So we need to put it in such a way that that is like explained, because otherwise it's still gonna be issues.
So did you discuss this at all at labor management, or is this?
Yes, we actually did.
Oh, okay. All right, I saw her hand. Wait
I
for
was
the
just
mic.
gonna say with the term,
You need the mic.
hello. Would the term to use be unscheduled absence?
That was it. Thank you.
So maybe the wording would say, so what we're trying to avoid is if somebody calls off sick, and there's just an illness, that's one thing. But if they call off because they have a doctor's appointment, it might not be necessarily an illness that would preclude them from taking the trip. So if they do call off, or if they do have a sick day the previous day, then they can keep their field trip as long as it's a documented reason why they have that day off.
Go ahead.
So what I did was change the last part of the sentence to unless appropriate approval is granted. Would that suffice?
Could you tell me what you just said? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, unless appropriate approval is granted. And that covers whether it's sick, doctor's note, or whatever we have, as long as it's approved by management, then we're good to go, correct?
And these also are step 7. They're all options right at the moment, so.
Okay, so let me explain to everyone why we're even talking about this today. So this has never been in our contract book, but it was agreed upon years ago. And it never made it to the contract book. So we're having all kinds of issues in transportation where the field trips are concerned. So my thing of it is we need to, protect the employees and make sure that if they just have a doctor's appointment or whatever, that they can go to it. It was put in place, this is what was explained to me. We had a driver, had a field trip on a Saturday. The driver called off that Friday. That Saturday never showed up for the field trip. The field trip was not covered. That was a call off. She was sick. It had nothing to do with any of the other stuff when you're off. That was only put in place if you were sick. So I just don't want it to be if we could actually approval, what does that really mean? Do that mean they have to go and, if I got a phone call on Friday, I go talk to my supervisor on Monday, for my doctor's appointment, so I can't go or can go. I have to get their approval first, because I think that's the way some people are gonna be looking at it.
Well, I think, and again, just kind of listening to this conversation so what I'm hearing is, the issue is if an employee calls off the day before a trip, so then there's two situations. If an employee calls off sick, then that trip is going to be reassigned.
Absolutely.
If the employee calls off sick, but has documentation to provide that they can in fact take the trip the next day, then they would have to provide that documentation to their supervisor to make sure that they have the ability to take that trip.
That's what you meant by that, Jared?
Yes.
Okay, see, that ain't the way I comprehend it, and you better believe we're gonna have about 8 people.
Well, yeah, so we want to just make sure that, if I have a doctor's appointment for my routine checkup and that's the only time I can get in, I'm going to be able to take the trip the next day. I just need to make sure the supervisor understands I'm taking a sick day, but here's my doctor's note for what I'm doing. I am capable of taking that trip.
Absolutely.
We just want to make sure that that driver is available even though they're taking a sick day. So the two scenarios is you take a sick day, you don't provide documentation, and then the trip's canceled. If you do take a sick day, but you can provide the documentation, then you're still entitled to the trip.
Gotcha.
Did you catch that, Amy?
And don't forget, this will all be refined in language, even though we're just kind of doing concepts right now, and everybody will get to look at the language to make sure it fits.
Right. Reassigned.
All right, take a look at that, see if that
Mike has a question.
Roll back up to number, I think, 4.
Oh, on the property side.
So I think my question is, like, where it says, any trip that is not declined within the first 24-hour period, will be considered a decline?
Yeah, that's when you're offered the trip. That really doesn't apply to the field trip, correct, guys? That's a whole different situation. Number 4 really doesn't have anything to do with, say, that's when you're offered a trip. You have to actually accept it. If you don't, then it's considered you declined.
So should it say any trip that is not accepted within 24 hours will be considered a decline? Is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah, you say within.
No, he's saying that it should not say decline, it should say any trip that is not accepted within the first 24-hour time period will be considered as a decline.
Is that what it should say, or?
I think you're right.
Eric, what do you think?
I think that's what,
You can change that word to within, so it should say any trip that is not declined within the first 24 hours.
They would like to say that it's not accepted within.
But no, we can't. But that's the language from the contract is declined.
okay, so it specifically says it's not declined,
Yes.
so,
Yes.
right, which means it's been accepted, but the contract says not declined.
I mean, either way,
I understand what you, I don't know.
But at the moment, transportation.
Any trip that is
employees
not
understand
declined within the first 24-hour time period will be considered as a decline.
Not decline.
So I guess the question is why did it decline if they didn't decline?
Right.
Being accepted, so.
I can see if they don't accept it, then it becomes a decline as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a little clearer.
They did not decline, it's been accepted.
Yeah, are these, that thing, okay.
Do you want to keep it declined or accepted?
No,
Go
I think it's-
accepted.
I mean, I don't know, you guys agree with Mike, I think it's clearer the way.
Makes more
it's
sense,
said.
but yes, I agree.
Any trip that is not accepted within the first 24-hour time period will be considered a decline. That makes sense, Jared? You look like perplexed there.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Good catch, Mike. Anything else?
Can you scroll back to number 7 again?
Sure. Well, I don't have it number 7 yet, but I can show you.
It's in the options, then.
Yeah.
There it is. Yes.
Can I get clarification of the purpose of step 7? Just clarification of the purpose.
Purposes, clarification of purpose of step.
For step 7, we have, we love field trips.
yeah.
They've always been favorites.
Only because that way I can grasp that if what we're saying there meets
Yeah,
what we're
okay.
trying to do, if that makes sense.
So it was more of a clarification for the employee stance, because a lot of them don't understand, like, a lot of the things are case by case. So we actually want to put it in writing so that there's an understanding across the board for, and then make sure everybody has equal treatment.
Or day before,
Yes,
specifically.
yes.
Fernando.
Yes, the language up there talks about calling off sick in a doctor's note, but what if I happen to have a roofer come to my house the day before a field trip? I may not have a doctor's note, or what if my child's sick, I might not have a doctor's note. So should we really be looking at if there's an absence the day before a field trip, the employee should notify their employer, their boss, as to the absence and document as appropriate that they can cover the trip the next day, because we're talking about sick days, but you know, with the hurricane going on, people are now having people come to their homes that were due screens, and maybe the only day they may not have a doctor's note. So I'd like to see some language where the employee is responsible to notify their supervisor they're gonna be out the day before their trip and provide the necessary documentation to be able to do their trip the next day. I think some of this needs to be on the employee to take the bull by the horns.
Would they normally take personal time then, if that were the case, rather than sick time? Is that what the issue primarily is, Jerry?
Yeah, kind of, sort of, but the problem is, like, a lot of this is case by case, so it's kind of hard to put an umbrella on it, like, to Fernando saying, like, there are all kinds of circumstances, so I think we're just looking for a pinpointed verbiage to use, but not necessarily just sick or a doctor's note or things of the nature. I think this would cover it all, but I understand what you're saying, like, the verbiage should, but a lot of it is case by case.
I think.
So any absence then the day before a field trip then would be subject to a reassignment unless documentation is provided that you can do that. Go ahead, Arlise.
What documentation? I mean, if I'm getting a roof put on my house, I'm gonna ask my roofer for another. I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, I think again, but and I don't know the nuances of the LMS and when you put an absence in, can you, if it is a personal time, then typically I would think if your personal time is just for that one day, then you wouldn't be subject to this, but I can understand where you might want to do that. But definitely we need, if it's a sick day, we need verification that you take a sick day prior to the trip, you have to provide documentation that you can, in fact.
And to comment on what you're talking about, Arlise, I think if someone were to be out, I know like you're saying, a roofer's not gonna give you a doctor's note right now, like, I totally understand.
I totally understand what you're saying, where a roofer may not give you a note, but I think the bigger issue here, the elephant in the room is ensuring that our bus driver communicates with the supervisor, I'm gonna be out the day before my trip, but I can still do my trip. So I think if we just have that communication, yes, Jared, it's case by case. Now, if the same driver 2 or 3 times is out the day before their field trip, I think you can have an argument and say, wait a minute, we're seeing a pattern here. But if it's one time, I think really what we want is the bus driver to communicate with their supervisor, I'm gonna be out today, but I can cover the route tomorrow. As long as we can have that documentation, that communication occur, I can work with that.
Arlene, did you want to say something?
Do you mind if I? The only addition that I have to that is if it's a personal day, is there a requirement in contract language that says they have to have prior approval prior to a personal day? Okay.
So, like Fernando says, I don't have an issue with that, right? If we say, if you have a field trip, and you're off the day before, just simply let your supervisor or your director know that you're still gonna be able to do your field trip. To make them, to let everybody know that they can do the field trip. I don't have a problem with that. But when you're talking about documentation, then that's something different.
So I guess the main issue is if you are absent the day before a field trip, you must notify your supervisor that you are able to still drive for that field trip.
I think we do. And I think we need to make it clear that this is.
I think
It's on, testing, yeah. So I think we need to make it clear that this is only last minute, like this isn't every day, like all day. This is literally for last minute call outs for a field trip, like the day prior of or to. Like, I can give an example, like we literally had a driver who was taken off campus by EMS and she had a field trip the next day. We're assuming she's not gonna do it. Well, we covered the trip and, miraculously she was healed and back on the field trip the next day. So, those are situations that happen, but we just, to give the clarity of what our expectations are, so that driver that happened to should have knew automatically, we see you leaving in the ambulance, we just assume that you're not gonna be here the next day, we cover the trip. So, that's just for this kind of stuff here, just to provide that clarity, but this is only for last minute, not all the time, just for the clarity in the room.
So that's why I use unscheduled.
Yeah.
Arlene? Anything to add? Ron?
I
Go
have
ahead,
a
Arlene.
question on something else. And I don't know, if we need to do it in labor management, just let me know. But it was another, item that kind of popped up in my head for transportation. And it is, me and Jared have had these, talks over, the year or so. So we're on the same page with it, but I think it should go in this, so our field trip people and our supervisors and employees, know, what the expectations is. So we have an issue that, on coverage. So what it looks like if my RTM ends at 5 o'clock, right? I get off at 4 o'clock, I'm gonna say 4 o'clock. I get off every day at 4 o'clock. And I help out, meaning if they're short, I'm gonna go do a middle school for them or whatever. That's not a part of my RTM. That's not what I'm supposed to be doing. But a lot of times when people are doing it, the field trip people don't wanna issue out them a trip because they stand that they're helping. But if it's not a part of their RTM and they're just helping the office out, they don't supposed to withhold their trips for them. So I think we need to put something in there to that effect. If it's, you know, a situation where they're just helping, they are still eligible to be, for those field trips to be assigned to them. Oh, this time. Okay, thank you.
Therese, welcome.
Just with the window. Okay, here we go. For clarification in that instance, is there an approval process for someone that will be helping? I'm not too familiar with how transportation works, but is there an approval process for someone that can just come in and help and? Yes or no?
Nothing is yes or no.
See, Ms. Domino, how you know? So it's not, but everything in our department do go by seniority. So, and I mean, we're so short right now, so if we were full staffed it, right? And say you and I was drivers, and you wanted to help and I wanted to help, the process would be, they would go by the seniority person. But right now, all boots on the ground.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the document to see where that language could be added. We have a specific name for that, you said? Is it just, other than just providing help, like, so a driver that might be,
It's no name, they're
Yeah.
just helping out.
helping out?
They're helping after their RTM, meaning after they're supposed to get off.
I mean, so basically, we're just saying that, you know, any driver is eligible beyond their RTM, regardless of what they're doing, right?
Ron, can you repeat your question again to Jared, please?
No, I just was trying to figure out where this would fall in here. So basically, one sentence that says, all drivers are eligible beyond their RTM. So if you're helping beyond your RTM, you would still be eligible for any field trip assignment based on that. You still have to come to that person first if they're in the seniority rotation. Jared's looking at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what you guys are asking, I'm sorry. So are we talking about trip eligibility? Is that what we're trying to add in here?
I think maybe in the past, some situations have come up where maybe a driver says, hey, I'll be willing to help out and take this route on Monday, but now a field trip comes up, and they'd rather be doing the field trip than helping out on Monday, they would still be eligible for that.
Oh, Jared.
Did I catch that right, Arlise?
No, I don't
Okay,
think,
then
I don't think that's what she was saying.
I am not going to offer my advice anymore. I'm not that familiar with it.
It is okay. We know that we are a very unique group. No, Ron. So, for example, my RTM ends at 4 o'clock. Every day, I'm helping, covering something. A field trip come up, right? And then the field trip, people are questioning whether I should get that trip or not, because I'm always helping. So the thing of it is, yes, that person should be able to get that trip because they're helping in the office. They should not be penalized, from not getting field trips because they're helping out because it's a shortage. You understand it? Is that better?
Okay.
Okay, we're all on the same page.
And I'm back.
Okay, good.
I think what she's trying to actually say, we do, almost every one of our drivers is doing routes outside of what they bid on.
Right.
And I've always made a promise to them that even though they're helping, they might doing a route outside of their time. Like if our team is 4 and you're helping with the Lexington Mill every day getting off at 6, if your name comes up in rotation, we will cover that route that you're doing to ensure that you get your field trip. So no matter what they're doing, we won't take away their eligibility for field trips.
Right.
And I think that's what our lease is saying. So what I could do, I could add it actually into number, I could just put in number 1 actually. And I think we should just put an extension in there stating something along the lines of trip eligibility, that management will ensure that you will get your appropriate assigned trip. And if you are covering, then we will ensure that you get your trip and cover the route you're doing. But I'll word it a little better. I'll send it to you. Give me a second to wrap my mind around it.
I just offering a suggestion. I think it fits better in number 3, but because it talks about availability and seniority in Bush Hive.
Yeah, I'm telling the chorus that he doesn't know anything between us anymore. Why don't we just add another number in and just put trip eligibility? Like that way we don't just have to speed in anywhere, we just put a number 8. Is that okay?
Let me just check one thing real quick here.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just looking at the existing language that we have around the eligibility and seniority and how that spells out who's eligible and who's not. And I don't think there's any conflict, so if you just add another number there after 1 or 2 or wherever that says, any additional help would not preclude you from anything on the list of availability.
Would something like that satisfy what you're looking for, at least? All right,
We sorry.
but no, we're not ready
Okay.
to do thumbs up, but I just wanted to be sure before we. Yeah, he's gonna put this, yeah.
Simple technical question. Is the field trip process document something that I should have access to be able to toggle back and forth, or just? It's linked in the. Okay, it says I don't have access. Okay, that would be. Okay. updated?
I did.
You sent it?
I'm fixing this, well, I was trying to get all of this in and then I'll send this, I'll send it now.
Okay, I'm gonna, unshare for a second, so I can pull up my email. For some reason I can't get into my district email right now. I can get them on my phone, but not.
All right, you got it now. I didn't change 7 yet, because we had a couple of options.
Yeah. We can go through 7 again, but get this one up. Reach for the cup. Okay. Where did you end up putting it?
Number 8. Match 5 here.
So that's the same, if somebody's filling in on any assigned days during the day, that doesn't affect their eligibility.
No, that's what she was meaning, she just wanted it in writing.
Right,
because a
yeah,
lot of the
that's right.
zones feel like,
Okay. Are we okay with that being number 8, since that's the only thing we have for it? Now we can see thumbs on it. All right. Let's go back to 7 then. We had several options in 7 that we have to kind of weed through and see which one would be the best fit. All right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, okay. That one, forget that, those 2. Okay, so there's 7. Well, because some of them are rewording the ones that other ones, so you really need to look at it.
no. If you were asked to do a field trip, you must notify your supervisor to drive the field trip on these days. How?
All right, 7 options. I I know we'll probably have multiple options included in step 7, but I don't know if we want all of them. Because I know we talked about doctor notes.
What happens if we want to modify one of the options? Can we modify an option?
Absolutely. Which one?
I know I shouldn't do this, I can keep my mouth shut, but on option 6, where it says, any absence the day before a field trip could be subject to reassignment unless notification is provided to state the driver can do the field trip the following day. So, unless, I would just, to notification, change documentation to notification.
Okay. That was the other one thing we had problems with.
Yes.
Was the doctor note.
Notification to the supervisor would be probably the better way to put that.
Okay, so. We think number 7, option 7 might clear everything up and we can delete everything else.
All right, option 7, if you are absent the day before a field trip, then you must notify your supervisor that you can still drive for the field trip on the next day. Okay.
That it leaves, it could be subject to give you flexibility. Because you got to do what they know.
Yeah.
Gives a little more strength to management.
So option 7, and that's the only option you want added to step 7?
Yeah.
I think 6, 5, 7.
Charlie?
Go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Hold on a minute. Now we're changing our
No,
minds.
6
Let me
is
let
more.
Jerry tell you what our mind has changed.
Okay, well, there we go.
Okay, boy, they're fighting over the mic over there.
Hey, speaking of legal counsel here. So option 6 actually kind of states 7 just more in a professional way. So I think we can go with 6. I think 6 covers it. Sorry.
For clarification.
Yep, Amy?
Just asking if you believe that it's necessary to state notification by what time the day before? Because at some point, you'll have to get to the business of reassignment if you don't hear from somebody. So is it necessary to say in here a specific time the day before?
I would definitely agree with that. So I'd say by 7 p.m. because those are our closing hours. So if we're not notified by 7, we know we need to automatically reassign that trip.
And is 7 p.m. too late to reassign it?
We have a short notice list that we can go down. Not
Okay.
necessarily. We can still get it covered.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you're not by your, by 7 p.m. The day before.
Okay. So now we're looking at option 6, not option 7. What about options 1 through 5? None of them are needed? Anybody else have an opinion? Options 1 through 5? Are you? Yes, Laura.
So are you keeping 1 through 5?
No.
Oh, no, okay, because there was some grammar.
Yes. All right, so we want.
Another comment, hold on.
Okay. Thanks, Ron.
I'm wondering with option 6, because that's just a blanket absence the day before, if we should add the part from, is it option 5 or 4, about if it's a sick absence, the documentation stating that they can return to work? Or did we discuss that already?
We did.
We did, I'm sorry, I forgot that part.
They need to notify if they can return to work if they've had a sick day before. If they're returning to work the next day. So eliminate options 1 through 5 and option 7. And stick with option 6. I see thumbs. All right. We have it. Thank you. What else do you have that's easy?
I think we should probably, I would prefer if everybody's okay to let Amy give her presentation. I want to make sure we get that in here because at some point we have some time constraints about, board meetings and those kinds of things. So I think we need to have that. We could work on the rest of Article 5 next time around if that's okay.
Yeah, and it'll give time for people to ask questions
Yes.
about Amy's
Yeah, I want to leave enough
presentation
time for
as
Amy's
well, so.
presentation.
Right. So, is that okay with everyone? You don't need to put thumbs, just let me know that, just know that's fine. Okay, so Amy, you're up. Amy, that's Now, you still okay with people asking questions as we go along, Amy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Amy can call on you because my back might be towards you. I'll keep looking around, but I may miss somebody, so.
Yay, all right. You never know, it's always crossing your fingers to hope it's gonna work. Okay, all right, so this is, we wanted to get started into our budget conversation as a bargaining team. This goes back to the conversation that we had when we had our big interest-based training and had some discussion at that point in time about maybe approaching our conversations when it comes to compensation this year just a little bit differently. So what we had discussed at that training for everybody who wasn't there was instead of before we would bring a bargaining authority or an amount of money to be bargained to the table, and then at that point we'd have a conversation and we'd be going back and forth. Instead, we had said this year, let's talk about the budget generally to get to help get all of our collective understanding as to budget process, the budget situation as we see it, and then get input from the table in terms of what, based on that information, we thought we would be best to see or what we want to see as a bargaining authority in this process. And then we would take that input and go from there. So that is what this conversation is meant to be, is that conversation to get input into that, ask any questions along the way. So we wanted to get into just explaining a little bit more about the budget and then what the indications that we have so far for next year, because we have no finalized budget from the state for next year yet, but we'll get into that conversation. So we wanted to start out with just explaining the budget in general. So the budget itself really has 6 parts to it, and each part or fund, as you might hear us refer to them, is set aside or given to us for a specific purpose. There's 6 of them. So the general fund, or what you might also hear it referred to as the operating fund sometimes, same thing, general fund, operating fund. That is the main fund of the school district that is used primarily for the education of students and the operating expenses of the district. So that's where a lot of the action, most of the action takes place as it refers to people we pay, things we do. Of course, there are other funds where that happens, but this is the main one. Then we have the debt service fund, and that is specifically for the payment of debt of the district. So the debt of the district really has to do with the money that we borrow really to build schools, and that is what the debt of the district is, and that fund specifically is set aside just for that. There's nothing else that happens besides the payment of principal and interest out of the debt service fund. Then there's the capital fund. That one is the one that's used to build all of our schools, a lot of things out of security and safety and security of different buildings can come out of the capital fund. Anything buying equipment, providing maintenance to our schools, all of those things happen out of the capital fund of the district. And we do have a committee that meets regularly to discuss all the things that need to happen as far as capital expenditures across the district. Various funding sources inside of that one. We'll talk about all the different ones. And it does pay some people, but that's not the primary purpose of it. And there are definite restrictions as to how and when you can do that inside of capital funds. The food service fund is just as it sounds. It supports all the breakfast, lunch, and feeding program of all of our students district-wide. The food service team estimates the revenues and expenditures for that, and then everything food service happens out of that fund. So all of food service employees get paid specifically out of the food service fund. Then we have special revenue funds. That's a fancy word for just grants, federal grants, right? So all of our federal funds are accounted for inside of the special revenue fund, and each of those has to be used for the very specific purpose of the grant. So however we write the grant, that's how the money has to be used. You probably are very familiar with some of the big ones, IDEA, which is for our students with disabilities, Title I, which is the main funding source for additional money that goes to school based on how many or the percentage of students in poverty. Title II, which is utilized for a lot of training that we do across the district. So those are some of the big ones that you've heard of. There's others, but those are just some examples. And then the last one is the Internal Service Fund, and that accounts for all of the insurance costs across the district. And when I say insurance, we're talking all of it. We're talking health insurance, and we're also talking property, casualty insurance, all of those insurances. And there's a long list of them that the district has to carry. Flood, our property or wind insurance, cybersecurity, you name it, that's, we have to be insured for it. Some statutes, rules, regulations, all of that. So all of that happens inside of the internal service fund, but the funds there are transferred from the general fund to cover those expenses. So it's not a revenue generating proposition. It doesn't get its own revenue. It takes revenues from the general fund in order to cover the expenses. We just account for them specifically in that special fund, so we know exactly what's going on within all of those. So just an overview of all of the different parts and pieces of the budget. And then on this pie, you see how each of those things break down. So the general fund, which is this big orange piece, is 44% of the budget. And this is the current year, fiscal year 25, based on what the final budget was that was approved by the board back in September. So 44% is in general fund, right? Followed by the next largest piece at 40% with capital, and then you see how everything else kind of falls in from there. So just a part piece to know was sometimes when we talk about the numbers get really large, but they break down and they break down quick. And so those are the different funds within the budget and how we come up to our total budget of $2.9 billion for the year. So then here is some information about where all the dollars come from. So these are all the dollars, revenues, right, that comprise the budget for this year and what source they are from. Some people are very surprised that the largest amount of funding that we get actually comes from local sources. People think that this, the majority comes from state or from federal. This is not the case. Most of our money comes from local sources, and when I say local sources, the biggest part of that is property tax, but there are other pieces to that as well. But you see how the total amount breaks out for all revenues across the entire budget. And then just an overview of how all of those dollars are used. because we have 109,000 students, and that accounts for all students. We're talking students within our traditional schools, charter school, homeschool, FES or Family Empowerment Scholarship, or that is those students that are on voucher and they attend private school. That's the whole shebang. So that budget supports all of them, right? So that's where that comes into play. And then you see just the sheer scope of the things that we do within the budget. This is a very large district, and some people are very surprised to find out that we are one of the largest in the United States, 27th largest at the last count. Because, a lot of places, they run very, very, very small districts. Florida, our districts are by county, which makes them larger than many of our counterparts you'll see across the country. And so we really do run a large operation here. We are all part of that. And this is just a breakdown of all of our enrollments across the school district. So this is just by grade, how you see those enrollments break out, just because we have a lot of students that we service all across the district at all grade levels. So just want to give a picture of our 10-year enrollment history, because this does have a big impact on the budget, and this is something where we are very unique in our district versus other districts that we'll compare with across the country and even across the state. So you'll see a 10-year enrollment history. In this enrollment history, you see the numbers are a little bit different. I just said we had 109,000 students, but this one only shows 89,000. This graph only accounts for our traditional school students, those ones that are here in our traditional schools. We service them, their butts in our seats every day. So that's what these kids are. So for a 10-year history, and I've only given 10 years, but the trend goes back even farther than that, the top line shows the total number of students or enrollment across the last 10 years. And then the bottom line shows the difference, the amount of growth in each year for those number of kids. You'll see that that line on the bottom shows a pretty consistent growth over the past 10 years. And like I said, if we had gone back more, the trend would have been the same. There was one blip year in 2020, 2021 where we lost some kids, 865, and remember, like, the world had gone crazy at that point, right? So there was a lot of strange things going on at that time. But other than that, we've had a very consistent growth, over 1,000 students a year inside of our traditional schools. So anywhere from 400 students to over 2,000 students, but at an average of about 1,200 to 1,300 a year. That is more than a school a year. Our elementary schools, as we build them, they hold 1,000 kids. So that is large growth for our district over an extended period of time. We're one of the highest growth and fastest growing school districts inside of the state of Florida, and we're probably one of 3 that have only grown as consistently as we've grown. So that presents great opportunities for us because, kids know the great things, and kids and parents know the great things that we are doing here. But as you can imagine, some challenges on the budget as well, because its growth doesn't really match the student growth itself, right? So just some history for us over just the past 10 years. And like I said, that trend tracks back farther than that. So now let's talk about specifically just the general fund. Remember, I said general fund was the main pot. There's different pots, but we'll talk the main pot because that's where a lot of the action takes place in terms of the stuff that happens inside of the district every day. So this is a breakdown specifically of the general fund, where those revenue sources come from. The largest amount, 63%, comes from local sources, mostly property tax. But we'll break that down a little bit, and then 37% from state sources, and just this little sliver here that almost doesn't even register, that is federal funds in the general fund pot. So again, the majority of those funds come from local sources. And then this is just a picture of how those funds are appropriated or how they're budgeted in the budget right now. So we told you where the revenue came from just now, but how are the expenses budgeted in the budget right now? So on the left-hand side, that left-hand pie is a breakdown by category, or what we call object, right? So the category is the main the main type of expenditure it is. This big orange piece, the 67%, it's people, salaries and benefits, right? So that's the largest portion, that is what we spend most of the budget on, is people. Really in all funds, but this is just in most funds, because capital, we don't really buy people. In debt service, we don't do that. But in the funds where we buy people, this is what you'll see consistently. 67 to 70% of the budget is going to be people, because education is a people-intensive business. So 67% of that in salaries and benefits, and then you'll see, what the other parts are broken out into as well, in terms of how much for supplies, for energy, for other purchase services, for some capital outlay. So you see the breakout here, but most of it is in people. And then on the right-hand side is a breakout by what we call function, or the type of expenditure it is. Is it an instructional expenditure? Is it an administrative expenditure? Is it a transportation or a maintenance expenditure? So the area in which that money is being spent. Again, we are an educational institution. You would imagine that most of it is going to be spent in the instructional area, and that is in fact true. So over on the right-hand side here, you see there's 64%. I'm running my little mouse over the picture, but you can't see what I'm doing. 64% that is spent in the instructional arena, and then you see how the other parts of the pie break down in terms of instructional support, maintenance, and other parts and pieces of the budget. So, many times the question will be, well, that's a lot of money, what are you spending on? Well, that's it right there. So then, to talk a little bit about the Florida Education Finance Program, because that's the money we have, how we get it, and how it breaks down. But where does this money really come from? And the most of the revenue that we get inside of the general fund is given to us through something called the Florida Education Finance Program, or what you may hear as referred to as the FEFP when people talk about it in short. So when the legislature does their work and provides the budget to each of the school districts, they have a formula in which they create the budget that every school district, or the revenue that every school district will receive in any given year. That formula is based on the number of students that they project us to have, the type of students that they expect us to have. Are they basic education? Are they ESE in some way? Are they ESOL? Are they vocational student? So the type of student they expect us to have, and they give us a certain amount of money for, or allocation for each of those students, and then there's other special categories that they will allocate us for a total amount of money through the Florida Education Finance Program that we will get. Then once they determine what that total amount of money is, some of it is generated through property tax, and other is given to us from the state. So that's kind of how it works. So this year, that was, again, our main revenue source in the general fund. $993.9 million is currently what we get through the FEFP, or we're projected to receive for all year through the FEFP. 58.5% of that is going to come from local sources or property tax, and then the remainder, 41.5%, is going to come from the state level. So only part of that do we get from the state. And for us, that's equivalent to about $9,241 per kid. So just to kind of compare that to, now all of the school districts work on the same formula, right? But depending on how it works for them, their result of their money per student comes out differently based on how the calculation works. So for example, I just told you, and the line in the middle of the graph shows Lee County at $9,241 per student. But then other counties, you'll see how their allocation differs. Some get more, some get less, depending on how their formula or allocation works out for them. So Miami-Dade receives, or is projected to receive this year, $9,165 per student, less than we will receive, right, per FTE. However, so what you see at the top is a comparison between us and the other largest 10 districts in the state. And then down below in the Southwest Florida region, you will see how we compare to our other counterparts that are close to us. So here in Lee, we're receiving $9,241 per student. Collier receives $10,852 per student. That's $1,600 more per student than we get. Or Charlotte is receiving $249.62 more per student than we get. So you'll hear sometimes a lot of comparisons being made, well, you know, other counties do this, or something is happening in this county or that county, but it's important to understand the breakdown of, so what are they really working with versus what another district may be working with, or how is the formula allocating for them, and this is just one funding source. So that's the FEFP. Yeah, okay, yeah. So let's talk about the investment then in salaries, because through the FEFP, which like I said is the main revenue source of the general fund, the general revenue fund is about a little over $1,993,000,000 of that was FEFP. So that's almost all of it, right? And so in any given year, as you can imagine, what happens in the budget is very, very, very dependent on what they're doing at the state level with the FEFP budget, which we don't necessarily have any control over, but that is what the main source of funding is. So let's see what has happened with the FEFP versus what our investment in salaries has been. And I just put the past 4 years up there, but I could have gone back more, but I just wanted to go to the past 4 years. So in FY22, the state increase through the Florida Education Finance Program of the FEFP was a negative. We actually lost money, and it was a negative 1.3% that year. However, the average compensation increase that we did that year, and I'm talking specifically for support personnel, right? So for SPALC at this point, negative 1.3%, but we invested 5% in compensation that year. So we outperformed the state in terms of the revenue source we were getting from them and what we invested in terms of salaries for employees. 23, the FEFP increase that year was 6.3%. We again outperformed by 7.5% average compensation increase that year, support personnel. In FY24, we almost doubled it. The state increase was 4.4%, but we invested 8%. And then, I see I'm missing a number, I'm so sorry. But in FY25, the state increase was 2.9%. We did more than double it because we ended up, I think it was 7. That was this year when we went into mediation, and I believe we ended at 7%, if I remember correctly, but y'all can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. So it was 6 point something, right? So we were, 6.5. So we more than doubled what the state FEFP increase was in this current year. So and you might be thinking, okay, well, then the math isn't math, and how does that work, right? If we are consistently investing more than we're getting, how does that happen? And really where that comes into play is with partially the district's fund balance, right? There's a couple of things that have to happen in that mix. In every budget, there's 2 sides to it, a revenue and an expense, right? So the revenue is one piece. So if the revenue isn't sustaining what we would like to do in any given year, then something has to happen on the other side of that equation. You have to reduce your expenses, right, in order to get the money to do what you need to do. And then second, you dip into potentially your reserves or your savings account, so to speak, in order to fund what you got going. And that's where fund balance comes into play. We have had some conversations here about fund balance before, so I'd like to get into it just a little bit so that we can break down some details related to that. Fund balance is anything that you have left over, your revenues, right, your actual revenues minus what you actually spent. What do you have left over? That's fund balance. But in the district's fund balance, it gets just a little complicated, yes, because there are some state rules and regulations that we have to follow with them. there really is 4 parts to a fund balance in any given year, right? We got what they call unassigned, so that is, it's free to be, right? There is assigned, it's set aside for something, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't necessarily maybe tap into it should you need it. And then there's 2 other places, restricted and non-spendable. And that sounds kind of just like it sounds. It's really not available for you to use for just anything. And so one of the things you see, this is a picture of our fund balance over the last, however many years is up there, like 6 years, and what has happened to it and why it's happened. But there is some conversation, and we've had this conversation here at the table, so I'll recount it for some of the people who may not have been at the table when we had the conversation. Lots of questions about fund balance. Well, you have too much fund balance. Why do you have that much fund balance? You can use that money, you can spend it on other things, all of that. And the state only requires you to carry 3%, right? You'll hear that conversation be had sometimes. So what does that mean, 3%? The state requires you to carry 3% of what, right? So there is state statute that requires a school district to keep in reserve or in fund balance 3% of what their total new revenues for a year are or would have been, right? And if you fall less than that, then you go into what's called financial emergency, and then the state monitors you. You don't want no parts of that. You don't want none of that. So that's what people mean when they talk about the 3%. But when they talk 3%, they're talking 3% and only counting assigned and unassigned. Because as I said, restricted and non-spendable, you really can't access it. You can't do stuff with it because it is restricted or non-spendable, just as they call it. So 3% is a state and statutory requirement. But I have at the bottom listed a statewide average. So when you look at the average of percentage of people's fund balance, where do people's fund balance lie, right, across the state on the average? And so you see where the average is, somewhere between 10 and 12%, because on average, you can be at 3%, but you don't want to be at 3%. That puts you in a little bit of a precarious situation should you be riding around the 3% area. And on average, across the state, between 10 and 12 is kind of where you see everybody lie in this time period, right? And that is through a state report that anybody can access. The state auditor general will audit every school district, and then they'll report those numbers out to all of us in the world to be able to verify that. So in terms of the district's fund balance, our district's fund balance, you'll see the financial condition ratio, which is that percent number that we're talking about, that 3% is called the financial condition ratio. But you see where ours lies in each of those given years. And in FY19, the board, or you see my little star there on the bottom. The board has given us guidance that they desire for our financial condition ratio to stay in double digit, meaning 10%, right? And so in FY19, I didn't go back any farther than that because then it kind of gets the number's hard to see on the slide. But you would have seen that fund balance coming down during that period of time. From FY17 to FY19 is coming down, 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 because we had a plan to down spend to get to the 10% that we're talking about. And some of that down spending happens as we reduce other expenditures in order to increase compensation expenditures while we're outperforming the revenues that the state really is giving us, right? So in FY19, we got to 11.58%, and then remember, again in FY20, stuff went a little bit haywire, crazy, right, with all the things that were going on. And so, because of some of the different things that were going on inside of COVID years, the fund balance did then go back up during that point in time, because there were a lot of different positions that were vacant that we would not have expected to be vacant during that point in time. We did get an infusion of other funds with ESSER and all of those other things. So we were on the up, but then you see in FY24, starting really in FY22, we start coming down again with a plan to downspend again related to all of our expenditures as we fill our positions that have been vacant, as we increase salaries and other compensation, and as other things happen inside of inflation and everything else. I mean, we all know how that is today. That plan for that fund balance to then shift down back again to the levels that we had gotten to in FY19. And so just wanted to have more of a discussion about fund balance, because there's been quite a conversation here before inside of compensation, and as we're talking about budget, then it seems like now's a good time, yeah? All right, so now let's talk about next year, FY26, which is what we're here bargaining right now and what that's gonna look like. So the governor, there's the process at the state level looks like first the governor will put out his budget request. This is what the governor says, this is what I would like to see in a budget. And then after that, the House puts out a version of the budget, the Senate puts out a version of the budget. They get in the room and gladiator fight it out. And then at the end of the process, we get some final budget that comes out from the state. We haven't gotten a final budget that comes out from the state yet. They're still working on that. It's supposed to be done by May 2nd, but they can also go into extended or special session if they don't get it done by that time. So we're still waiting to hear. But I can tell you in the governor's budget request, he suggested for our district approximately a 1.7% per FTE increase for our district, which equates to $35 million in total. That's it, $35 million. It's not a lot when you think about the vast operations and everything we've got to do and everything that will price increase for 1 year to the next and all of that kind of stuff. So putting it into perspective, not that we're grateful for everything we can get, but 1.7% of an increase is what it was in the governor's budget. In the first Senate run, and that was just recently released, their increase for Lee County School District was approximately 0.3%, not 3, but 0.3, at a total increase for the FEFP of $12 million. 12 million. So the legislative process is still ongoing, still going. So we don't know what we will receive at the end. But this is what we have so far through the indications of what we received from the state. So that's the information that we're working with as far as the state level goes now, and what we're anticipating and how we're trying to work on the building of a budget, which we won't be complete with until after we receive the final information from the state, do a bunch of other stuff, and then finalize a budget for next year. So now let's talk about just putting that into perspective so we can talk about specifically SPALC and what salaries look like for SPALC. The annual salary cost of all the SPALC staff with benefits is about $160 million. So just to put that into perspective, the cost of a 1% increase, and this is for SPALC only, is about $1.6 million. So that's just, I want to make sure to give that information so that we can all, as we're discussing, potential authority or how different things will happen for next year or the input that everybody wants to give, it's important to have that context so we can just talk about it in terms of that. In the past, we've always talked about like a salary increase. On average, it's 8% or 7%. That doesn't mean every individual got that, because in the past couple of years, different individuals have gotten different things based on how compensation was structured. But on average, it ended up to be the equivalent of how much, right? Last year, 6.5%. So the cost of a 1% increase for SPALC this year, about $1.6 million. So just information for the group's benefit. And then, yes, ma'am. Melissa?
Would you?
Oh, I'm sorry, hold on, let me.
I was just wondering if you would be willing to share this with us, so I don't have to worry about taking such good notes.
Yes, ma'am, thanks for asking. I should have said that in the beginning. This will be in the notes that you receive. So I'll send it to Amy, she'll put it in as part of the notes, and then you'll be able to have access to it. Mhm. Okay. So then, I guess that brings me to the end of kind of the information that I wanted to share with this group and with the world, whoever might be watching today. And then our next steps would be based on kind of what we discussed in terms of how we were trying to create a conversation around compensation, around budget, around bargaining authority this year. We needed to know, we just had questions about, so what other information do you think that us or other people need to see or understand? And then, how can we work together to facilitate the compensation conversation that we will be having in the very near future? If there's any information that we believe we need to or can share with the board, and then just trying to get additional engagement around the budget, so hopefully we get to a very interest-based and a very collaborative process in terms of moving through our compensation conversation this year. So I will be quiet and wait for any other questions that you might have.
We've been sitting here for a while. Do we need a break? Or?
Are you asking, did I wear you out? Is that what you're saying?
Or are we okay to continue with questions? Or do we need a caucus to come up with questions?
Everybody is saying they need a break, they
All
didn't
right.
say anything.
So let's say a 10-minute break?
That'd be fine.
10 minutes. Good? All right, since everybody's back, during that little break, did anybody come up with any questions or comments on Amy's presentation today? Nothing additional you need to know? Since everybody's back.
I just had a question regarding the chart where you had all of the different counties that were listed and the differences in those. And something that kind of caught my eye was like Charlotte and Collier that are surrounding us. Is that a function of property taxes that makes it different? I know this was a basic piece here, but I didn't know whether we had more information on why there's there are differences in the counties that are right around us.
So it's just a function of how the whole formula for the Florida Education Finance Program works. Their mix of funds is going to be different from ours depending on how they drive. So Collier is a property rich, so to speak, county. And so they're going to drive the majority of their funds through local sources, very much like we do. But based on the formula and how it drives money to different districts and for the types of students, then they have half the amount of students that we have and more property tax roll than we have. And so based on how the formula works, then it ends up, they're receiving much more per FTE than our district is receiving, just based on the formula itself. Did I answer that question?
So we had this question come up in the other bargaining because, there are other counties that have additional millage, but that's not necessarily counted in what their FTE is in relation to the FEFP or was it?
No, we're not.
Right.
That's right, it was not. So even if, and some of the other counties have additional millage that they levy for additional, salaries or some other type of initiative that they may have in their operating fund. If they do that, that's more funding even on top of what we were showing on the screen. It doesn't even show on that. So that would be in addition to what we saw here today.
Any other questions or clarifications needed? Oh, another one.
You mentioned the FES scholarship funding, and I'm not sure whether you spoke about this, but maybe just for the group to understand, because those monies then come out of what we get, correct? Okay, so, and the number of scholarships continues to grow for our county, right? Okay.
So just for clarification, you're talking about like scholarships for kids that want to go to private schools, that funding, the actual cost of that scholarship then comes out of our FEFP allocation?
That is correct. It comes out of that FEFP allocation, and this year estimated at about $73 million.
Any other questions? Harley?
Just for clarification, so that $73 million, because I think people are used to hearing the term of voucher, is going into voucher money, right? It's going into vouchers.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, Amy did have at the end of her presentation some questions for us to consider. You can put those back up, please. That's okay.
Sorry,
That's okay.
technical difficulties, but,
Don't know why it's extending for some reason, so I'll try to fix it. But the questions, and I'll just reiterate, were what other information do we believe that people need to see and understand? How can we work together to facilitate our compensation conversation? What information can we share with the board? And how can we get more engagement around the budget?
Okay, those were the 4 things she had listed at the end of the presentation for next steps.
maybe I have them on there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any ideas to any one of those of how we can get information out, come together and come up with some plans? How we need to proceed? Because this does have to run.
So I know this is kind of new to the process, that, you know, we haven't gone to the board, we haven't asked for any bargaining authority, that we felt like it was a good idea to present, you know, what we have in the budget, try to get some of those questions answered. But I think what we'd like to somewhat accomplish tonight is to have a conversation about what are our interests. So what are we looking for, first of all, based on the information that you gave, so that when we go to the board, and the next step is to take this feedback that we get tonight before we go to the board and inform them of what the conversation was, where we're at. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult right now because we don't have any finalization into the budget, but based on what we're seeing, doesn't look real good in relation to what the state may be putting on the table. So based on that, and maybe some feedback on, you know, what is the interest when we're talking about compensation. Kirsten? I'll do the walking.
Okay.
I need more steps.
I do too.
7,000.
Well, what I would like to see is to continue our correction for the compression that we had started last year. I think we had talked about the placement on the salary structure, that, that was just year 1. We were just getting everybody onto the new structure, but we wanted to continue with that over the next, 2 to 3 years, however many, to try to get everybody onto the salary schedule range where they would be. And my personal thought is I would like to see that based on years of experience in the job, not on the longevity like we did last year, but we didn't have any other data to work with.
Okay, thank you. Arlise, were you wanting to say something?
Yes, I would like to say, we actually need time to discuss this information with our team. And like Ron said, we don't have the budget back, so we really don't know. The way we have pretty much always moved, because that is the most important piece when you're talking about budget, we have to know, what it is that we're gonna receive. So I think for us, it's just a conversation that we need to have later, because I really need to,
Process?
Yeah.
Was a lot of information, right?
Right. I guess then, is there anything outside of maybe a number where you're looking at, I know Kirsten brought up the idea of compression. We brought up, I know that we've been having some conversations about some differentiation within the pay grade. So, one of the things that we did last year was we implemented a pay grade system that gave us some flexibility to do those kinds of things. Like, if we want to differentiate between, and I don't want to use any examples, I'll use like an administrative example. Okay, so within a pay grade, do we want to differentiate between maybe a high school principal and an elementary principal? And could we apply those same concepts to what we have in the SPALC pay grades as well? And is that the interest that maybe that would, that's the kind of discussion I think maybe we could take some feedback from you guys, from SPALC at this point, if there has been any conversation. If there hasn't, I completely understand.
So I'm still in the same place. There's a lot of information. We have not had a chance to discuss this. And to fairness, to our team, I think we should discuss it with them because I know that they're gonna have a lot of questions. And just to be fair, to give them a chance to dissect, right? And be able to come up with a response to those questions and for us to ask, whatever questions we want. Because that's normally what we do also. We always have conversations with them and get everybody's input and interest and explain anything it is that they need explanation for. So tonight we are not at the place that we can actually have conversation about any of that until we have conversation with the team about it.
Understood. Is there anything else that maybe you didn't see tonight that you would like to see other than the budget? Of course, we'd all like to see what that is, but is there anything that wasn't? So if we place the presentation within the agenda, you'll all have access to that. Is there anything that's missing that you didn't see tonight that maybe we need to, go out and research and put back in?
Anybody? Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, so last year when we were doing the Evergreen study, that was finalized for SPALC. We're done with Evergreen. They finalized everything.
For the pay grades that we have, yes. So this, it's up to the district and what.
Sorry, I didn't want the streaming piece not to hear this because that's been a question. So basically, what Evergreen did was make recommendations based on all of the feedback they got from employees and within the job descriptions. What should those pay ranges be and what pay grades would those job descriptions fall into? And then the recommendation from Evergreen is the district then has to take those pay grades, work within the job descriptions and figure out how you differentiate within the pay grades. So I'm gonna use you, for example, Laura. For your job, what you do at high school, is that different than maybe somebody that does the same job title but in an elementary building? And so do we have that conversation about, okay, so maybe within the pay grade, within that range, maybe that person in a certain school building should be at this within the pay grade, whereas somebody else might be that, and then adjust to the years of service accordingly. That makes sense to everybody, what I just said?
But that's up to us to do,
Yes.
not Evergreen.
Yeah, so it's up to the district.
Also within the differentiation, will education and other options be available to discuss?
Sure. So I'm not gonna put her on the spot, but the extra compensation, I am kind of put her on the spot. She can explain how that works within the
Well, I think there's two different kind of things to mention here. All this reference to phase 2 that we've been mentioning. What my team is doing is currently we're working with chiefs to kind of prioritize the order that we begin to go out and implement differentiation within different job families. Like, for example, we started with transportation. When we talk to each area, we're talking about where are the opportunities for differentiation within each area. As Ron mentioned, you know, is there a difference between high school and elementary? In transportation, is there a difference in, you know, one route versus another route? Where are those differences that, you know, we can differentiate based on the complexity of the job in and of itself? So that's kind of what we're working on phase 2. So we'll be discussing differentiation, we'll be completely reviewing and revamping job descriptions for each position within each area to make sure that they are, the minimum qualifications, preferreds, are actually reflective of what the job really involves, reviewing the duties. And then once we have those true and accurate job descriptions, we'll be doing another in-depth dive of a market analysis for those. So the round one, your phase 1, essentially, we just put a grade assignment based on Evergreen's recommendation to get everybody onto the salary structure. Phase 2, we'll be looking at that again and making sure that recommendation is accurate. Especially when we get into differentiation, some of them may end up being a higher grade than what we were, you know, originally placed. So that's kind of the work that we're going to be doing there over the next probably 18 months of phase 2. But as far as the education, certification, currently the process for like new hires coming in is we are looking at experience directly related to the job that they're being hired into. We are giving credit for education that exceeds the minimum requirements. So if the minimum requirements for a particular job is an associate's degree, if the individual has a bachelor's degree related to the position and they are not already eligible to receive a degree supplement for it, we will give additional years of credit experience for that degree. So it's, so previously in our human resources system, we didn't have a field in there to document a person's actual experience related to a job. We had that field entered, so now that we have it, we are collecting it on all new hires and getting it into the system. So ultimately, we'll have that data that we can say, you know, Chris has 12 years of experience, I'm just saying 12, I don't know what years it is, 12 years of experience as an electrician, so where he should be on the pay range as a, an electrician with 12 years experience is here. He's currently paid here, so our goal is over 2, 3, whatever the number of years to implement becomes, this is where we need to get him. So how far can we bring him each year? And I did want the one additional point to the taking in years of experience and the education. The other piece that we are looking at for new hires is what we are calling the observable range. And the observable range is what current employees who are in that same position are making. So if someone new is coming in with 15 years, we'll use Chris again, 12 years of experience as an electrician, that person should possibly be paid here, but because Chris is only paid here, we're only going to bring them up to what Chris is making, and then that new hire will move up in the range with Chris over the next couple of years. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
Thank you, Kristen.
That's why I handed the microphone to her, so that she could
Always go
explain
with the
that in depth.
experts, right?
Chris, it looks like you have a question.
Not really quite sure how to ask this, but I'm maybe in the form of an analogy.
Just rip the Band-Aid off.
Go ahead.
If I was to budget money, let's just say every year I put X number of dollars away for a trip or something of that nature. What I'm kind of curious is we go back 15 years ago, we stopped the steps here, more or less. And the people that were making the higher dollars have now retired or left the district for whatever reason. Where's that budgeted money gone at this point? Would the assumption have been that they would have been in the higher, making the higher dollars, or everybody else, everybody got kind of put at a standstill, if you will? And is there anything that's reflective in these budgets to show that, I don't want to call it savings per se, but is that what you'd be looking at?
I think if I understood the question, each year, so while you say that people have been at a standstill, no, because there have been salary increases in each year. So while it may not have been in the form of a step, there were still increases that happened each year for people. But every year, our budgeted amount of salaries are recalculated based on who is here, right? And then those, whatever is anticipated for the next year's budget for everything, for compensation and everything else, each year it's recalculated and refigured based on current circumstances. Who we believe will be here next year, what the revenue is going to look like coming in next year, what expenses we have. So all of that is taken into account in the generation of any given year's budget, if I understood and answered your question correctly.
Well, I do understand this is kind of a tough question, but let's assume you had stay with the electricians. You had 10 electricians, and they were all, being paid out at the rate of, just use a round number, $20 an hour. Then we go back 15 years ago. We've lost a lot of those electricians. Now we're bringing them in at $15 an hour. Certainly, the budgets would have had to be reflective of the fact that you had, 10 electricians initially, and that budgeted number should have kept going forward. But since all this stuff is now kind of collapsed in that sense, where's that money? I mean, does it not get pushed through into would the assumption be that those same 10 electricians would be making more and more and more going forward? And again, in my mind, it'd be almost like you would have saved that money at some point, and it should be reflected in some sort of a budget. Maybe I'm not making sense with this.
No, I mean, you're making sense. I think I understand the question that you're asking. Maybe my answer isn't making sense, because I think I'm saying, no, there really isn't a savings year over year from that, because you're saying 10 electricians, if they leave, then the people replacing them may not be making as much, or we project out that those same 10 people are going to be here 2 years from now or 3 years from now, but no, we don't. We don't project that at all. As a matter of fact, we know on average how many people, typically retire and therefore would be replaced by new people, not to even mention the fact that there'll be more of those people, right? So not only do we have to reflect what we think the mix of people is going to be, but we have to account for more than we had before, and along with salary increases and along with compensation increases, because health insurance and all that enters into the picture. So it's not like we make a picture now of what we think it is going to be 3 years from now, and that's what we're counting on. Every year, that's a new calculation, because every year the state is giving us something new, and we don't know what that's going to be. You're not looking like I answered that question, but.
Again, I know it's a very difficult thing. It just in my mind, it's these people that were making the bigger dollars, I guess, if you want to call it that, but now dropped out, retired, or through attrition and whatnot. They're now gone. wouldn't that money, in theory, been budgeted, you know, with the same dollar values? You're saying it's gonna reset every year, you're recalculating the whole shooting match at that point.
The whole entire thing, yes. Mm-hmm.
I think part of what Amy said too is that person might retire, but she may have to hire 2 more people because of growth to replace that one person, which makes more of a cost than saving. I think she was also referring to that as well. Want to pass the mic to Patrice, please?
Okay, the observable range that you mentioned, is that the range that we saw within the evergreen structure from, say, the beginning hourly rate to, no? Okay. I got another question. Because my constituents are wondering, how are they getting from their new hourly rate to the end? How they want to know how can they get to that end hourly rate?
Okay, so to use an example, say that grade S7 ranges from, we'll just make it easy, from $15 an hour to $23 an hour. That's the grade range. The observable range is all current employees, so all electricians who are assigned to that grade, they're actually making between $17 an hour and $18.50 an hour. So that is the observable range, the 17 to the 18, what our current employees are actually making. So what we would then look at is the current employees, what they're actually, what that observable range actually is, and then that is where new employees would be placed.
But as far as how an employee moves up, that's for us in this room to help try to decide.
So that's the cost of living increases, compression adjustments, how we adjust them each year.
And if I can add to that, I think that's, and I kind of came into this process a little bit late last year when you talked about the pay grades and where you were going. And I think the conversation was, and what's hard for everybody to wrap their arms around is, it's a multi-year process, because you can't just snap your fingers and put everybody exactly where they're supposed to be on the range, and then, try to do that over years as new people come in and people who are there are existing without, because again, if we just looked at that, if we got outside the observable range and what we can afford to do for everybody would just be then based on that, just placing people there would probably be the ability to be able to do that, if that makes sense.
And one of the goals of the district also is to be able to provide performance or merit pay. Before that can, that's a future goal on how people would move in there, but before we can really even start considering something like that, we have to really nail down and improve our performance metrics and processes to make decisions on performance pay more objective rather than subjective of, effective and highly effective. And it's gonna take a little while to really implement those measures that are more objective, but that's
further down the road.
A future goal, but one other way that people will be able to move within the range.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel that I need to say this. Because it is a lot of issues every year with evaluations. And it's issues this year about evaluations. And the process should be simple because there's language put in place for it. The process is not being followed. So I want it noted here, as like everything we done had. I am really concerned about that, because what is taking place now. So I just want that to be noted about evaluation. We have basically, we have a lot of different people doing different evaluations right now. The whole county is not doing the same evaluation. So there's a lot of issues that definitely have to be worked out. So, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Patrice? No. Okay. You're welcome to, Patrice. We don't make judgments about how often you talk.
I guess maybe some of my other comment, I guess a lot of it had to do with what you're calling observable range, I guess. You know, it's what others were seeing for quite some time. I mean, you know, you had employees that would, you know, work right alongside me, make half again as much as I did. And then the way it's looking, I can't even get there with the current pay range. So this is the kind of thing that is just causing a lot of strife within the different departments when they see, you know, what they believe they should be making. And now there's almost no way to, or it doesn't appear to be a way to get there. And of course, you know, I am liking what I'm hearing, that there's an effort being made to get us back to that. And I do, you know, again, personally, believe that I don't think there should be any talk of performance pay until such time as everybody's put to that where they need to be at this point.
Okay.
And I think we're all in agreement on that we need, you know, as we go through this process and start to decipher where people should be, that there's a lot more work to be done within the structures to make sure that they're set up for the success we need to have. So.
Okay, anybody else? And I know at the beginning, people did come up with questions, but at least that you need more time to process and to get together as a team to discuss some of those next steps that Amy had as part of her presentation. So is there anything else we can do tonight, or?
Before we end, we do have to fill out the timesheet. Sorry, I passed those around.
Oh, the timesheet.
Or the sign-in sheet, I should say.
Right. I would like to thank Amy for her presentation. Lots of information in there for you to process. And as Amy French said, it will be part of your notes, so you can go through it all again in your own home and in your spare time. With that, as the sign-in sheet is going around, I want to wish everybody a pleasant 4-day weekend. Rest and relax, spend time with family. I hear applause for that one.
Some of us only do.
Oh, only got 3 days, I'm sorry. 3 days.
Before we break, can I just kind of ask a question
Sure.
as far as the next steps? So I just want to make sure we're kind of on the same page. So I think we have the 28th. 28th is our next session. I don't know if we'll be closer to budget, but we do have some language in Article 5 that we can clean up. And maybe if you guys have time, then you can actually come back once you've digested this and gone through what her presentation is. You know, we can spend some time, you know, answering any questions, and in the meantime, if you see anything, Arlise, that's missing, or you need an addition, then you can just kind of reach out to me and we'll get whatever.
Yeah, and if you think of any data request or anything, I'm sure you can let Ron know, you know, something information. I know Kristen says she has, you know, they have more data now than what they had last year when we got into this process. So if you think of anything like that, let know too that you might need, either for the next time or sooner than that. And we'll go from there. And I guess if you're signed in, you can go. If you haven't signed in, you have to stay after school.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.